Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York City guitarist Mike Moreno. Over the course of our interview, he talked about his latest 2015 disc called Lotus and some jazz cats he's played with over the years, like Robert Glasper and Jeremy Pelt. He's from Houston, Texas, and he now calls New York City his home. He has had an interesting ascent to the top of the modern jazz food chain. He discussed who has taught him the most, what it's like to travel, who inspired him, and many other things over the course of our interview. So please, dig it, my friends.
Mike, thanks for taking a little time to talk with Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, man.
Let me go ahead and start off here. I know that you have a brand new album out called Lotus. Before we get to that, give me a snapshot, just kind of a brief snapshot of your activity and what's been going on lately.
Yeah, I mean, lately it's just been, the end of 2015 was pretty intense, just a lot of traveling, a lot of stuff with Kendrick Scott, Oracle, because we had just released, his record on Blue Note. A lot of late October into December, end of December was with him. And then I was doing some stuff with my band. We released the record and did some shows. And then I was also touring with Will Vincent, who I just recorded with as well. That his album is coming out this year now, 2016. So, it was just kind of jam-packed, a lot of stuff happening all at once. Yeah.
That's a good thing. So let's get to Lotus. Your recent release with Aaron Parks, Doug Weiss, and Eric Harlan. Give me a little bit of an idea of kind of the creative forces that went into this release.
It's been a long time coming for recording with Eric. I kind of started, some of my first gigs were with him here in Houston. I'm in Houston now just for the holidays and stuff. So yeah, some of my first gigs as a leader, had Eric Harlan on them, and some of my very first recordings I ever did in the studio. But since moving to New York, we never really have played so much with my band out in public, at least. There's only been a couple of things. And we definitely haven't recorded together under my own name. I mean, we've done albums with other people. But this is the first time that I could actually, I had a album's worth of material, and I knew I wanted to have Eric on a project, and this just seemed like the perfect opportunity to do it because of for one, the tunes that I had. Second, I knew that Aaron Parks was going to be doing the record, and Aaron and Eric have had history recording together with Aaron Parks' Invisible Cinema. So, and that was just a project that I felt could have developed more. We only did one record, and I think we only did one gig as a band, after Aaron recorded that record. So I definitely wanted to try to continue the vibe of that band, the sound that band has. I felt like this was a perfect opportunity to do it. The tunes were really simple and really melodic, and I knew it would be great for Eric to kind of bring a different kind of rhythmic approach on this record than my other records. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened. But all of the music was written in that time since my last record, Another Way, the one that came out in 2012. So, but it up until a few months before recording, I wasn't exactly sure what shape it was going to go in. So it took me a little bit of time to figure out exactly what I wanted to do with the music,
It's a great album. I'm looking forward to spinning it on my program for sure.
Oh, great.
So talk to me a little bit about your roots. You mentioned you're in Houston now. Talk to me about growing up in Houston. What was it about growing up there that fostered this love of jazz that you have?
Well, I kind of fell into it by luck, actually. For me, I was really serious about music, around 13, 14, and some friends of mine saw that, and they knew I was about to start high school, so they kind of they told me about this school, the High School for Performing and Visual Arts, and how great it was, and that I should really look into it. So I told my parents about it. We went down and checked out the school, and when I went there, I wasn't sure exactly what kind of style of music I wanted to go into. So I was kind of looking at classical music as a as a way of studying music, because I knew I couldn't go to school to study rock or anything like that, at that time. When I went to, open house at the school, they said, "Oh, you play guitar? Well, there's really no other program that we have here for you except jazz." And, I had been listening to jazz already at that point. I had checked out some Tony Williams' Lifetime and stuff like that, but it was more fusion kind of stuff. I was really into that kind of guitar playing, like Alan Holdsworth, and and I was checking out stuff like Steely Dan and Larry Carlton, and Robin Ford, and guys that kind of were playing like blues, jazz, sort of, But it wasn't until I arrived at that school where I really kind of committed myself into really researching the history of jazz and looking at trying to play it in a more traditional sense. I found a great teacher here in Houston who I studied with named Todd Vulo. And right away he saw I had potential, so he was always inviting me to come and sit in on his gigs. So I got a lot of experience really early, 15, going in and sitting in with bands. And shortly I started getting gigs, but, when I was 15, 16, I started to work, So that's kind of how it happened. I mean, and the more I was doing it, the more serious I got with it, obviously. And all the kids I was going to school with at HSPBA, I auditioned and got into the high school. So once I started going there, it was just, it just snowballed, I was surrounded by kids who wanted to do exactly what I was doing, and we all just influenced each other and motivated each other. And it was just music 24 hours a day, basically. We were in school for 8 hours a day, and then as soon as school was out, like, we were hanging out together and, playing at each other's houses and playing gigs. And so it never stopped. It was just that time at that high school was pretty much, 18-hour days of music.
So many luminaries come out of that school. Just off the bat, that had to be a motivator for you.
Yeah, when I went to see the school, they invited us, me and my parents, to see the spring concert. So we went, and that's when I first saw Eric Harlan play, actually. So I saw Eric play when he was 17, 18 years old, and I was just 15. So yeah, Eric's only 3 years ahead of me, actually, so I must have been 14. And it just kind of blew my mind that these kids that were, pretty close to my age were playing music on that level. Because when Eric was, 18 years old, he sounded, he sounded amazing. So that's why when he moved to New York, he started working right away. There was no kind of like, prep period for him. He was already ready when he was in high school. So, yeah, but everyone in that band that I saw that night, what kind of just blew my mind. And I couldn't believe that there were kids that young that could play like that. To me, it sounded like I was listening to like a great concert, at any place in the world, like those Vanguard or something. That kind of, scared me to death and like just made me, that summer, all I did was practice and listen to music, and I was just expected to walk into that school and kind of just be, kicked in the ass basically every day, and which did happen, so it was a great experience,
So from that experience, you move on to New York and go to the New School University. What kind of culture shock was that like for you to go from Houston and what you were experienced at the Visual Arts High School to go into this new experience?
Culturally, it was a shock, but in the true sense of culture shock, I wouldn't say that. Like when I went to New York, it was more. I was also going to school, so it kind of softened the blow a little bit. But that environment wasn't any different than what I was experiencing in Houston as far as the educational part of jazz. It was basically like all the material we had covered in high school. So that was the easiest part about moving to New York, was going to school. The hardest part was trying to figure out how to work my way into the scene and trying to get over the shock of, the actual being starstruck by seeing all these incredible musicians that I had been listening to all through high school, So every night I would go out, I would see guys like Greg Hutcherson and Roy Hargrove and Mark Whitfield and Adam Rogers, and Kurt Rosenwinkel, and Mark Turner, whoever, all of those guys were just not, with some exceptions. Some of them were very famous at the time, but some guys were just, not as well known, so it was very easy to approach them. They were always hanging out. You know, they were very casual about it. So that kind of excitement, you know, was incredible. Just that first year in New York kind of was probably the most growth I've ever had, you know, in 1 year, because I went from just being a kind of good student player to, you know, kind of having my eyes opened to the reality of actually what needed to happen to create music on the level that everybody was doing it in New York. You know, that was the main, you know, shock, I guess. That
Absolutely.
First year in New York.
Well, and then you move on and you start playing with people like Liz Wright Band and Nicholas Payton with his quartet and Wynton Marsalis, you know, Jazz at Lincoln Center. What was it like to dive in not only into that New York scene, but to be around such big shots and luminaries in the jazz business?
You know, some things I've had some surreal moments where, you know, I kind of had to pinch myself a little bit. I would say that definitely maybe, you know, but you know, it was always, there was always so many close calls that I was almost going to get a gig with somebody. You know, it had been happening for so long, like basically the whole time I was in college. You know, people were like, "Oh man, I just recommended you for this gig," or I would see somebody at one of my gigs, you know, like Sammy Hill or Joshua Redman or Kenny Garrett, or, you know, people that were hearing me play and, you know, asking me questions about my availability, and, you know, there were so many you know, things like that where I was like, "Oh, I think I'm about to finally get a good gig." But so when it actually did happen, I felt like it was just like, I was like, finally, you know, I almost, it was like a frustrating thing that, like, I almost felt like I was like, finally, you know, I feel like I'm getting the gigs that I've been preparing for, you know. But there were some times, like I remember when I first was touring with Joshua Redman, and we were playing a festival in Ireland, and Peter Bernstein was there, you know, and Peter is one of my heroes, you know. I love his playing, you know. He's one of my favorite guitar players, and I first met Peter and Josh at the same time when they were in Houston playing a show here. You know, when I was playing with Josh's band, and then Peter was at the gig, but in the audience, you know, it was like the opposite of, you know, how we met. You know, that was kind of a moment where I was like, holy shit, you know, like, this is, you know, the cards are turned, you know. It's like now Peter's watching me playing with Josh when I met all those guys. I was just a kid, you know, I was just 15, 16 in the audience watching them. You know, I got Josh's autograph and everything. And so it was, there was definitely moments like that where I've been on stage and looked out in the audience and seen some of the people who were influences on me, you know, and that I loved to go out and watch when I was younger, but still that I love to watch today. But, you know, there was definitely moments like that where it was, you know, kind of surreal. And, you know, but it's also, yeah, a bit nerve-wracking sometimes, like playing with someone like Wynton Marsalis. That was another time where, you know, I went in very kind of on edge, because I know he doesn't really like guitar players, you know. And so I was called to do this gig with the Lincoln Center Band, and, you know, I felt like I had to just stay out of the way, you know, and like not cause too much trouble. But, you know, afterwards he came up to me and he was like, you know, where did you learn to play like that? You know, like what kind of music were you listening to? I don't hear guitar players very often that I really like the way they play, or that I hear kind of have a command of the language and stuff like that. And so that was, you know, one of those moments where I was just like, wow, you know, it worked out in the end, you know. But yeah, each experience has been different.
And that kind of is a segue for me. Obviously, things have worked out. You've had Grammy nominations with people like Jeffrey Keyser. What is it like to kind of hit that, you know, the top of the music mountain, so to speak, and to get recognized by the industry? What have those honors been like for you?
I mean, to be honest, like those kind of things are always really random to me, because I mean, not to say anything bad about those records, it just kind of happens. Those records were Grammy nominated, you know, like of all the records I've done, it wasn't like they weren't any different than any record date I did, you know, not better or worse. I don't feel. When that kind of stuff started happening, I was like, okay, you know, that record, like of all the records I did this year, you know, it's kind of, to me, I don't really look at it it looks good on paper, but I've never really felt like it was a sign of any kind of success I was having. It was more like, why didn't all these other great records, there's some other records I played on where I really feel great about the work, and I felt like those records should have got way more recognition than they got, So, yeah, it's a little bit of a kind of trivial thing, when it comes to Grammy nominations and awards and best of lists and all that kind of stuff.
And the one thing I want to kind of ask you, when you came up to you and said, how'd you learn how to play? You obviously have a language that moves people. What do you think you're saying through your music? What are people feeling, do you think?
I mean, I hope it's what I like to listen to and what I like to, strive for is just kind of, a strong foot in the tradition of where the music came from, but not, feeling like I have to be in any kind of box, so to speak, of having to play bebop, with the right sound or the right feel. I try to play the way I play, that comes from all my influences, and I try to be, the first thing I want to be is melodic, and I don't want it to go over people's heads, and that's never been anything I've enjoyed listening to, so I feel like people, like my heroes of this music, don't play like that. Like, no matter how harmonic or how, involved they are with the music, it never goes too far to where, they can't have just a normal audience, so I was never really interested in doing any of the kind of experimental jazz or, so to speak, kind of grant-oriented jazz, or grant-formatted jazz. I just kind of always wanted to try to just play honest music, So I hope that's coming across, in the music. I hope people feel that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can't force myself to do anything, just to be, intriguing or complex or, necessarily advanced. I just, whatever comes out, naturally is the stuff that I put out, And I've written a lot of stuff where afterwards I listen to it and I'm like, this sounds like I tried to create something, even if I didn't. This sounds like, something I tried to create something really tricky or rhythmically complex, so I'm not going to use it. It doesn't fit in with the rest of my music, so I'll leave those things off the albums usually.
Let me ask you this. You've had great teachers. You've gone to great institutions. Who has taught you the most about music?
I really feel like sometimes it's the people that are around you in the beginning, I owe a lot, obviously, to my first guitar teacher, Todd Vulo, who passed away, but I felt like those guys, you never know quite what words did what or, what technique did what, but I feel like everything, everyone's destiny or whatever result or wherever they're at is just a combination of, of luck, really. A lot of it is like being in the right place at the right time to take influence from certain people. So, I owe a lot, obviously, to actually some students I went to school with. There was a guitar player named Stefan Schultz who, it's weird, he also passed away. He was very young, but he was one of those guys where when I mentioned before that I went to that high school expecting to get my ass kicked every day, and he was one of those kids that actually did it, but he never did it in a malicious way. He was always kind of just like, it sounds pretty terrible. Like, why don't you stop by the house and let's listen to some records? You need to get these records and you need to check this out and check out these tunes. And he was, he was just one of those guys that for whatever reason just loved to share music, and it wasn't any jealousy thing. He knew that if he was obviously going to show me all this music that I was going to improve and probably, take work from him and stuff like that. But, it always amazes me that people are so open, and so I really owe a lot to him. His name was Stefan Schultz. And then, like I said, Todd Vulo was my teacher, and he gave me so many opportunities to play when I was really young, sit in. I was always welcome to come sit in at his gigs, and no matter where it was. If there was a gig where he needed to wear a suit, he's like, if you wear a suit, you can come and sit in, So it was a lot of stuff like that, I owe a lot, obviously, to the director at HSPVA, the high school, and he booked us on so many gigs. We were playing like 2 or 3 nights a week in high school, just for the school, and I was always working as well outside of the school. So all of those years that I was in high school, I was working just as much as I am now, probably. But so yeah, there was a lot of people who just cut me a break, and gave me gigs, but I can't put my finger on, like, I feel like I missed that window where people really had mentors, I felt like that was kind of a thing that was in the 80s, like, or the early 90s in New York, where there were kids who arrived and they got gigs with someone like Art Blakey, and they were taken on the road and really mentored and shown the ropes, so to speak. But I kind of missed all of that.
So let me ask you this: who would you consider your jazz heroes? Well,
Wayne Shorter, for sure, is someone that I have up there, with I don't know how much higher you can get than that, musically. For me, it's just, his music is amazing. His approach to improvisation, everything, his writing. So Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, and then on the other side of things, like Milton Nascimento is another person, Caetano Veloso, Brazilian artists, and all that music to me is kind of related, harmonically and melodically and rhythmically. So those are definitely some of the guys, that I can only try to take, influence from them and try to produce, even a fragment of what they've done, Pat Metheny, of course, is another, on the guitar for sure, is just untouchable, there'll never be another woman, another person like that, it's just, so yeah, those guys to me are just, they're on another level, that seems like so hard to reach at this stage and where the jazz is,
Yeah. Well, let me whittle this list down for you. If you could get into a time machine and see anybody in the history of jazz, who would you go see and where would you go?
For me, it would definitely be the Miles Davis Quintet, like the 65, with Herbie and Wayne and Tony and all those guys. That would be my number one choice, and then after that probably it would be Coltrane's famous quartet with Elvin and McCoy Tyner.
Let me ask you this: we're talking about greatness here, and we're talking about your career, so I want to kind of bring everything down to this point right here. I typically kind of like to ask, where do you want, if we have a conversation 20 years from now, what do you want to talk about? But what I want to really hone in more on, you as an established musician that's been around so many cats over the years, what kind of mark do you want to leave on jazz? When you get to be an older fellow, you're in a rocking chair, and you think back on your life in jazz, how do you want the annals of jazz to remember you and your contribution?
That's a big one. I just want to be a part of the scene that kind of took the guitar from being. I feel like the guitar in the jazz world has always been kind of boxed in. It's either extremely traditional or it's extremely traditional in the sense of bebop kind of guitar with a hollow body sound. No effects, anything like that. It's either that or it's kind of funky, kind of like organ grinder swing kind of approach to playing the jazz guitar, which for me, I always felt like, the music that I love to listen to never had guitar in it, as much as I love guys like Wes Montgomery and Joe Pass, but it was never the music that touched me in any real way, as much as the music from Wayne Shorter and Miles Davis and Herbie and those guys, kind of Joe Henderson. There was no guitar on any of those records from the 60s, even in the 70s. So for me, I wanted to find a way to put guitar into the music that I like to listen to, So and for my age, when I came into the scene, there was already some guys who kind of had started that process, like, obviously Pat Metheny and John Scofield and Kurt Rosenwinkel, Bill Frisell. But I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't so much like inventing a new a style of playing the guitar. Like I feel like all those guys really have a unique language, and what I was going for was kind of trying to speak the same language as the music I was listening to, like the language that Joe Henderson and Herbie and Wayne were using. Trying to play that way on the guitar without any real effects. I use reverb and delay and stuff like that, but I don't want the timbre of the guitar at all, or make it sound like another instrument. So, I just want to be a part of that scene, and if there was any contribution that I had to the music is being able to, play that way on the guitar, which I really don't feel any. There are very, very few, if there are any, guys that really can play like that. Yeah, it was just phrasing wise, the language, linear wise, all the language, the vocabulary, the kind of inflections on the notes and everything. I wanted to be in that kind of style, coming from that influence, but also just mixed in with all my other influences, from rock and Brazilian music. So, I hope that that's the way, people look back and see it,
That's a perfect way to kind of put a closure on things. Mike, thanks for opening up. Good luck with the new album. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Mike for his music and his time. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or you can visit the neonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.